Good morning, members of the committee and members of the public. Today is Wednesday, December 15th, 2021, 9:30 a.m. This is a hearing of the House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. We are conducting this hearing both in person here at the State Capitol in conference room 325 and via video conference. I have with me Representatives Mark Hashem to my right, Representatives Amy Perruso and Dale Kobayashi to my left, and participating via Zoom is Representative David Tarnas. We will have other members joining us virtually or in person, and so I will acknowledge them when they do come in person. Members, I want to note that an amended notice of meeting was filed at 9 a.m. approximately this morning due to developments yesterday afternoon with some of our informal conversations with interested persons that had been identified by the committee. So struck from the agenda is item number 3, submission of testimony by interested persons to the committee, and in its place is an issuance of subpoena ducis tecum to organization and individuals identified in the review of documents and testimony provided to the committee. Because we have some timing issues, we're going to jump right into the testimony of Mr. Ross Murakami, but members and members of the public, I'd like to inform you that we will likely take a pause at some point when we have the appropriate number of individuals to then issue the subpoena ducis tecum that we anticipate we will need to wrap up some of the work of the committee. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Mr. Ross R. Murakami from KMH LLP to provide information about the financial record keeping procedures and processes of 2 agencies, the Department of Land and Natural Resources as related to DLNR Special Land and Development Fund and the Agribusiness Development Corporation. Before we start with his testimony, if I could have Mr. Murakami arise, and so we can take the oath. Mr. Murakami, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Murakami answered in the affirmative. So members, to start this questioning, let me just provide some context initially. From the audits that we have reviewed, I want to point out that KMH LLP was retained by both of the agencies separately. It was just convenient that it was the same CPA firm for us. I'm not so sure it's so convenient for them, but I really want to thank Mr. Murakami for taking his time to be with us today. KMH was retained by, again, both agencies, DLNR and ADC, to assist with financial preparation of their records so that they could then be audited by separate CPA firms that were retained by the Office of the Auditor for specific fiscal years. So we are here to follow up on those procedures, findings, and next steps from the perspective of KMH LLP and for the insights that they can provide to us about those agencies. So before we start, Mr. Murakami, we've had some conversations before this, and I think for the edification of the members of the committee as well as the public, if you could explain just generally and not specifically as to each of these agencies, what is it the work that your CPA firm, KMH LLP, which is highly respected in our community, do with respect to these kinds of, I think in the audit reports, it was identified as cleanup, but really it's about preparing financial records and documents. If you could explain generally what that process is for this committee.
Thank you, Chair Belatti. If I could remove my mask so that the members of the committee can hear me better.
Yes, please.
I do have a prepared opening statement, but I understand given the time restrictions, maybe I'll just shorten it and just kind of focus in on that section that to some degree responds to your initial question. So just to clarify, I oversee the solutions division within KMH, which is the division that provides non-attest and accounting and business consulting services. Non-attest services are non-audit services. So we don't do any audit work in our solutions practice. KMH does have an audit practice that is run by different partners, has different staff, professional staff that conduct the actual financial statement audits. We do not do the work for those financial statement audits. We try as much as possible to stay away from doing any kind of work on any entity that we are currently auditing. There have been some instances where we've had to do that, but very, very limited, and we shy away from all of that. As far as what KMH Solutions does, we do provide, as I mentioned, non-attest services to various state of Hawaii departments and agencies. These services include providing assistance to the department and agency management in preparing detailed accounting support, account analysis, and other work papers requested by their auditors to perform the annual financial statement audits. Since all the work is done under the direction of management of the respective state agency or department, they retain ultimate responsibility for the completeness and accuracy of the schedules we provide. In other words, all the information is provided to us by the respective departments and agencies. And what we basically do is put it together, organize it so that it's auditable. But we don't do any audit work on those schedules and statements. It still remains the responsibility of management. So management approves all of our work papers before it goes to the auditors. As Chair Belatti mentioned, we were engaged by both ADC and DLNR separately to do work for DLNR for the 2017 audited financial statements and for ADC's June 30, 2019 financial statements. And again, in both those cases, what we were asked to assist them with is to put together supporting schedules for the audit, basically. Now, in both instances, the entities hadn't been audited in the previous year. And in fact, for ADC, it was the first time they had ever been audited. And as a result, the amount of effort that was put into put together that initial financial statement information, the financial support was quite significant for ADC. For DLNR, they hadn't been audited for several years, so it wasn't as significant an effort. However, DLNR is a much larger organization, so it was still quite a bit of work.
Okay, so I'd like to just further clarify again the work, and I appreciate that you've made the distinction between the solutions versus the audit side of the business. Before we dive into each of the separate audits, I'd just like you to further clarify the routine kind of nature that government agencies engage businesses like yours to help with financial work papers, organizing these efforts. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Every year, the Department of DAGS basically puts out a request to solicit qualifications from CPA firms to assist the state and, in fact, county departments with preparing for their audits. Now, these are, again, non-attest services similar to what we provide, well, identical to what we provide. So there are probably about a half a dozen firms in Hawaii, CPA firms in Hawaii, that are regularly identified by DAGS as qualified to assist departments in preparing for their financial statement audits. We're just one of those firms.
And then again, it's a pretty routine process because if you can speak to the fact that, you know, these agencies may not, the difference between the cash and the accrual and how they maintain records.
Sure. Government accounting is basically cash basis. But when it comes to doing the financial statements are required to be presented on the accrual basis of accounting. So basically what that requires is at the end of the fiscal year, June 30, each department that puts together a financial statement to be an accrual basis financial statement needs to make a number of estimates as to what liabilities are existing at that point in time, what amounts are due but not collected at that point in time. And it is, if you can imagine some of these agencies which are dealing with literally thousands of customers or tenants, et cetera, it's a significant amount of effort, which is only done once a year. And that's why these organizations need assistance, because this is not in the normal course of their month-to-month, day-to-day activities. This occurs once a year, and it's a significant amount of effort that's put in to put everything together. So that's why we assist them.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. So members, we're going to dive into DLNR audit first, and then we'll move to the ADC. Before we move to the ADC, I will open it up to questions, and then we'll move to the ADC. And you can ask questions both generally or specific to the DLNR audit. So with the DLNR audit first, Mr. Murakami, if I could just ask you to explain how you came to be engaged, because I think it was a little bit different in comparison to how you were engaged with ADC and some of the work that you did in helping to complete that engagement with DLNR.
So DLNR is not required to have a financial statement audit. Many other state departments are required. In ADC's case, they were required to do an audit because of the bill that was passed. But for DLNR, they are not required to do a financial statement audit. Management has decided at their discretion to perform that audit. And primarily it is because they believe by doing that, they're able to get a better handle on how their operations are going, how the measurements, the financial measurements within that organization. So in 2017, that was the first time that they started this process, and they've been doing it every year since then. So it's really something to be recognized that they really didn't have to do this. They chose as a matter of a course to conduct this audit. And it is a significant undertaking and a significant investment of assets, but I do believe that it has helped them get a better handle on a fairly complex and very significant department.
So that was something that they took on their own with the firm of NNK, and then they hired you folks, KMH, to assist with the financial preparation. And again, it was motivated in large part because of the change in staffing.
Correct.
If you could speak to that.
Not in 2017, but subsequent to 2017, a new fiscal officer joined DLNR, and one of her missions was to get that audit back in place. 2017 was the appropriate period for her to get that audit started. And yeah, it's really because of her efforts and commitment and the commitment of the chair to put that financial discipline in place. But DLNR had been audited in previous years. It was several years that they hadn't been audited. So bringing those accounting records current took some effort.
And this was department-wide. This was not just the SLDF fund.
Correct. It was department-wide, and I want to make sure that our perspective was department-wide. We did not look specifically at the fund that you're speaking to.
And members, this is my last question, and then I will turn it over to you folks for questioning. But on that note, Mr. Murakami, we did ask you to focus in on the work that KMH did with respect to SLDF. And were there any specific things that you found that you'd like to comment on in the process of helping SLDF, arrange, organize its financial documents that you would like to share with the committee through your work? Well,
I think in the audit report, there's reference to a system that was in place several years ago called SLIMS. It was a legacy system that the land division was using to manage its assets, and lease agreements, et cetera. They have since then converted over to a new system called Yardi. I think it might be Yardi Voyager, but that was a significant undertaking because of a number of leases that they have. We have had some initial involvement in pulling information out of that, and I don't have personal direct involvement in that process, but my understanding is that things have improved and continue to improve. That was a significant effort to bring things current, get more current technology in place, something more reliable, and I'm hoping that things will get better for them. But again, it's management's decision to do that, and I think in light of some of the concerns that were raised in the audit, I'm hoping that these concerns will be addressed in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. So members, I'm going to open it up for questioning. Chair Tarnas, you're up first.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Murakami, for joining us today. You know, I'm interested because you were able to go in and see how well DLNR was doing things and help them organize. What did you find, because you saw how it was operating under the former system, under SLIMS and now under Voyager. You know, what could you tell the committee in terms of these improvements that the new technology is providing them? Because we were concerned, and we've expressed concern about whether they can keep track of their late, you know, their unpaid rent and be able to understand that in much closer to real time. So what did you find in your work that related to that?
I don't know if I can, my response is not gonna, I don't think I can answer your question as far as what I found. We didn't go in specifically looking at how well Voyager or Yardi captures that information. We're relying on the information coming out of it, but I can say that having a system like Yardi, Voyager in place should improve things because it's an accounting system. It can help make those measurements. It can, if you're gonna load all the lease agreements into Yardi, and you can, when you set it up properly, and I know they hired local consultants to help them get it set up, you should be able to get the financial information out of that system on a very timely basis. SLIMS wasn't set up the same way. It wasn't, it didn't support the accounting measurements that they needed to do on a regular basis or on an annual basis.
And just a follow-up question. It sounds like you know, management's decision to take these steps of their own volition is commendable, and that they are working to make some changes in-house without being told to do that. Did you find that in your work with them they were you know, collaborative, cooperative, and because you were asked to come in to do the work? What was your relationship with the client in that regard?
I did find management to be very collaborative and open to improving the overall situation. When we go into work with a department or agency, it's not just to, our focus isn't just to address the current year. If we see ways to improve things, we'll make recommendations. And I would like to recognize the department for taking many of those recommendations and moving them forward. And so I found the DLNR management to be very open and committed to putting in the appropriate controls, et cetera, to have good financial reporting.
I appreciate that context. That's very helpful. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Chair Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Murakami, so I think you can appreciate kind of my puzzlement on the situation given your experience with auditing and accounting and what you're currently engaged to do. Now, we're set up as this committee, especially because we have issues that were raised in an internal audit by the state auditor regarding these two agencies. So that's what we're here to look into. Now, you were engaged to do a financial audit, which I'm not sure if people understand, but it's when you say a test function, that basically you're there to opine on the correctness of the financial statements, and that's it. That is all you're engaged to do. But in this case, it wasn't even that. You were engaged to help the auditor, help the company do an accrual to cash conversion of the work papers for the purpose of another financial audit. So,
correct, yes.
That's correct, right? So, so I think it's important to be a little bit careful that you were really not brought in to opine on the sufficiency or efficiency of the lease management systems per se. So anything you have to say on this is just based on what you might have noticed while you're in there working with them, preparing accrual to cash conversion work papers. I mean, because I'm a little confused as to why you're here to talk about the lease management systems when that's really not what you're engaged to work on.
Yes, your assessment is correct. We were not brought in specifically to assess the sufficiency or effectiveness of Yardi in comparison to SLIMS, or even prior to that when we were working with SLIMS. We were just picking up information out of those systems to help facilitate the financial statement audit. So my comments are very limited in the limited interaction we had with those systems. We did not conduct an assessment of those individual systems.
We also have opinions on management's intent to improve things, which is really not what you're there to do at all. I mean, you were not there for any operational issues. You were there for one specific purpose, and that was to assist in preparing cash to accrual work papers, right? So it's really not your professional opinion on either the management's intent to get better or on these lease management software, because I mean, that's what you happen to notice while you're in there. Is that
correct? Yeah, my comments regarding management's level of cooperation and their willingness to move things forward are all based on my interactions with them related to a limited engagement, which is, as you mentioned, really helping to pull together information for their financial statement audit.
Right. So just something that you learned incidentally as part of your what you were engaged to do, which was very specifically to work on these worksheets and
correct.
Not to really form an opinion or opine on management or the lease management system.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Rep Hashem. Rep Perruso. Okay. Thank you. Let's focus in on the ADC audit. And so I'm going to start this line of questioning and then we'll open it up. Mr. Murakami, what is the current status of the audit? Well, back up. What were you retained to do for ADC in relationship to their financial papers for the financial audit for ADC?
So similar to what Representative Kobayashi just described, we were brought in to help convert their cash basis information to accrual basis information for purposes of the June 30, 2019 audit. But as I mentioned earlier, this is the very first audit that ADC ever went through. So there were significant measurements that had never been made before that involved going back really from the inception of the entity and bringing that information forward. One area that was was particularly challenging was identifying all of the capital assets that should be reflected on basically the statement of financial position of ADC as of June 30, 2019. So as I understand, ADC started with the Waihole ditch. Well, over the last 20 some odd years, there have been a number of additional parcels that have been acquired by ADC, structures on those parcels, improvement to structures on those parcels, et cetera. So all of those expenditures to purchase capital assets had to be accumulated. And that doesn't really exist in the typical state records. You really need to go through and pull that together. Now, there are databases that capture some of this, but if you are not putting together annual financial statements, you're not reconciling all of this information. So there's different databases that hold some of this, but ADC didn't have that prepared. So it is something that we needed to help organize. That was just one area that we needed to do, but it was a particularly challenging area.
Okay, so with this, and again, I hear the challenge. You were again retained by ADC. You worked closely, but there was a staff change in the middle of this, correct? That might have caused further delays for the preparation of the work papers, or since then there was a change in staffing. Can you explain that?
Correct. I believe if you look back historically, ADC has been somewhat understaffed in their administrative office. Last December, the administrative services officer retired, and I believe she had been there since the very beginning. So with her, when she left, there was a significant amount of history that also, that was basically in her head that was lost. And they have hired a new ASO who joined them a few months ago, and he's been involved in helping complete the financial statement audit. But he didn't come from ADC; he came from another department. So he has, when he walked in there, he had no history. So he had a steep learning curve to go through.
And similar to the question of Chair Tarnas with DLNR, did you find the ADC staff cooperative, collaborative in their work to help organize, their decades of records that had not yet been really organized in a fashion that could be then audited?
Yes, they were cooperative. They understood what our role was. Obviously, this was the first time they went through an audit, so they were unfamiliar with really what was expected. So we helped provide some context on the type of information that needs to be pulled together and how it needs to be pulled together. But they were very cooperative in that process. I mean, again, we're working to help them meet their obligation to the audit. So I think they would be very cooperative with us.
Mr. Murakami, so at page 4 and 5 of the ADC audit, there is a explanation about what had happened with both your work to come in and to help assist in organizing, and then the stoppage of the financial audit in sometime in January or late last year. From your vantage point, has KMH completed all of the work that it needs to do to then turn over to Acuity for them to be able to complete their work for fiscal year 2019?
We've finished all the work that has been that was considered necessary to complete the audit. We have been working with Acuity since we were engaged by ADC. So there's been a communication going back and forth. So the information we provide, or that we prepare for ADC, that is then provided to Acuity. There might be, Acuity would have normally some questions. When those questions arise, we work with ADC to respond to those questions. So it's been a back and forth over that period of time. And at this point, we believe we have addressed everything that has been asked of us. So it is really now in Acuity's court. But I would also like to point out that auditors have busy periods during the year. And if you're not able to deliver your work papers to them at the appropriate time, it gets really hard for them to get to that work because they have other commitments. So
at what point in time? Thank you, Mr.
Process.
Mercer. At what point in time was KMH done with its completed work for the Acuity to be able to complete its work? Because according to the audit report, it said that Acuity expected to publish its report in January 2021.
We finished the work. Again, there was this back and forth. I believe the work we were asked to do, we completed this past summer. So
summer 2021.
2021.
Okay. And in our previous conversations, I had asked you, what are the causes for the delay at this point? And you had said some outstanding questions. What are those questions or issues?
As I understand it, there are a few lease agreements that ADC needs to provide to the auditors. primarily for parcels on the island of Kauai. There were a few questions that arose as a result of an event that took place on a site right above Wailua back in the end of September or early October of this year. There was a fire that occurred on one of ADC's parcels, which exposed a number of abandoned vehicles that were then removed. But upon removal, there was indications that there was some potential environmental issues as a result of leaking fluids out of the vehicles. And the appropriate question gets asked, which is very difficult to answer: when did that contamination take place? Was it before or after June 30 of 2019? Because as I mentioned earlier, as of the date of the financial statements, you have to make certain estimates of liabilities. And if you have a liability to clean up that parcel, did that liability manifest itself before or after June 30, 2019? I don't know if you can answer that question. I don't know if anyone can answer that question, but it is a question that's open.
Okay, so let's take that first, and then I want to go back to the question about leases on Kauai that are outstanding. So first on the question of liability, as you just said, nobody may be able to answer that question. So in the auditing world, if there are areas in which questions are not immediately answerable, is there a way that an audit can proceed and conclude and note these areas of concern that might be open questions so that the audit can actually be completed and turned over to the people who have commissioned that audit?
Yes, there will be instances when there are issues, either management doesn't agree with the auditor's opinion and they're gonna agree to disagree. The auditor might feel that if that disagreement is so significant that the auditor feels it has a significant impact on the financial statements, they have the right to put an explanation in their audit report about this disagreement. If there is an uncertainty, like this situation could be an uncertainty that is significant enough, but it's just unknown, it's basically what's considered a scope limitation. Again, the auditor can identify this as an uncertainty, an issue, an open issue, to let the reader of the financial statements understand that there might be something that's not reported here that could have a significant impact on the presentation, but it's just unknown. So the auditor has the right to put that explanation in their opinion and then conclude the audit.
Okay, thank you. Because I think, for us being told in the audit that it's going to come in January 2021, and it is now at the end of 2021, timeliness is an issue here for us because we need information and we need information to act in 2022. We can understand, I think, and I think that's the value of what the audit procedures, provide, is that, it can point out the areas of uncertainty, provide information to us as the commissioning agencies or organization, and then let us proceed then to make decisions in a timely manner. So going back, so thank you for that explanation, Mr. Murakami. Going back to the leases on Kauai, if you have been watching this, right, a very deep concern of this committee has been the fact that Kauai seems to have evaded any kind of scrutiny in this audit, which was pretty significant for the history of this agency. What are the 3 leases that remain unexamined, that need to be examined at this point?
See if I can find that reference.
If you're not able to, in follow-up to this hearing, if you could provide the committee in writing the name of those outstanding leases, that would be very helpful to us, because we in fact have obviously a lot of documentation as well, and we'd like to see what the problems may be concerning those leases.
Certainly, I believe some of them are called license agreements, but they're basically, I'll consider them leases. But yes, I can provide a list of what is still outstanding right now that the ADC has not provided to the auditors.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. So expected timeline of completion, you don't have any insights into when that financial audit, because your portion of the work has been completed. Is that an accurate representation?
Correct.
Okay. At this point, that's my end of my question. I'm going to turn it over first to Rep. Hashem as Chair of Agriculture.
I just have a couple simple questions. In the audit, there was really no mention of Kauai. So you're stating that you did have information. It sounds like from what you're stating that you did have information or dig into stuff about Kauai within, not, since you didn't do the audit, you basically gathered the information, right?
Correct. I mean, Kauai, there are the parcels on Kauai and the acquisition of those parcels, as well as the lease agreements related to those parcels, we would have had to look at them similar to the ones that we looked at on Oahu.
Okay. Do you know, I don't know if you're the proper person to ask, but do you know why Kauai wasn't mentioned? If the information was there.
I can't comment on that, why it wasn't brought
No, that's
up.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I know, I already answered my question. I know you're not the person to ask. So, my other question is, so as you started, you mentioned that when you started the audit process, it was very difficult for ADC to dig the information from the past, right? Did you notice a difference between the way ADC had their records kept from the beginning till now? Or is it?
Well, I think there's, in every audit process, management certainly learns something. And I think if you ask management of ADC, they will say they have learned a lot about how important an audit is. They have a much greater appreciation for what the purpose is and the value. So we, obviously we're still focusing on 2019, but I think, again, I'm hoping management is going to take the lessons that it's learned as a result of this audit and carry them forward and improve some of the past practices, address some of the past practices.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That was my question.
Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Representative. So, same issue with the ADC audit that you were basically brought in there to do the cash to accrual conversion work papers. Is that correct? So, any opinions you may have on the staffing at ADC is just incidental to that engagement. That's not what you're brought in to opine on. You had no responsibility to include in the scope of your engagement any operational recommendations or evaluations for the agency. It was just a strict worksheet preparation engagement.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, we were not brought in to do any kind of evaluation of the staffing levels or the qualifications of the staff, or I mean, we basically are brought in as you identified to help get them ready for their audit, which primarily revolved around getting their cash basis information to accrual basis.
Understood. So again, that is really a personal opinion found incidentally as far as staffing at ADC in the process of your engagement and not anything else. I mean, that's just what you happen to know while you're there. And
yes, it is a personal opinion, not one that was as a result of any of the work. It wasn't a deliverable, if you will. It wasn't the purpose of the engagement that we conducted.
In this business, you know as well as I that for somebody like KMH with a legacy of integrity that is the backbone of your business, I think we're pretty careful historically about what we opine on and what we talk about and in what way. But you found it important to come in here and opine on these things that you weren't engaged to really opine on in the first place. Oh.
I'm trying to be responsive to the questions that are being posed to me. One part of my opening statement that maybe I didn't cover is that, the scope of our work, as you've said, it was limited to assisting each of these entities in preparing for their audit and not to do any kind of qualitative assessment of the organization in any way, shape, or form. However, the questions that are being posed to me are basically my personal opinion. I'm responding with my personal opinion.
You're responding to the questions that are being asked here,
Exactly.
not on your initiative to really make these statements.
Correct.
So one of the line of questioning that I think is fairly obvious that's been happening prior to this and continuing today is the idea that there is some kind of gotcha with scope omissions that, and particularly what I've heard time and again is that somehow there's some nefarious reason why he would, the state auditor would not look at things related to Kauai for ADC, that is somehow some corrupt issue that, or for whatever odd reason, he's not looking at Kauai. Now, that's obviously a fairly bizarre assertion to somebody like me as an auditor, and I would think that's your background as well. When you set scopes for an audit, just kind of talking as an expert opinion, like you have on other issues here, you're doing a risk benefit assessment as setting scopes, as required by any auditing standards. And is it ever where you feel like that should be something that is looked at as, well, the audit is not complete because why did you not focus on this operationally? I mean, it's just such a bizarre concept to me.
So just to put in context, your question is in planning for an audit, you will look at the, if you use a risk-based approach, you're going to look at the areas that have more significance to the financial statements, which may result in not looking at certain areas that are insignificant. Yeah, I mean, that is the approach you would take. And in this case, if Kauai was considered insignificant, then.
And after the fact, maybe some things come out, but at the time you haven't audited yet, you're setting the scopes for the audit. And whatever might be lurking out there is not really apparent to you at the time. What you're looking at is what's visible when you're setting scopes. I mean, that is at the front end of the audit that you're setting the scopes. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So all audits require planning, and planning involves obtaining information from the organization to gain an understanding of the organization and its activities, its current activities. And then from that, you plan your audit based on making sure you're addressing the significant areas. And then as the audit is conducted, if something comes up that requires you to dig further in an area that you hadn't planned on, then that is your right as the auditor to deviate, and your plan gets adjusted.
So as auditors in this, in a litigious society, you're very aware of everything that has been leveled against you potentially or others in the profession as far as accusations of incomplete work or work that is not legitimate. Do you have any experience with anybody ever coming after auditors for scope omissions like we're doing here?
I think Representative Kobayashi knows my history and the firm that I worked with, and the fact that there were some potential audit failures, and we have not had anything like that. But as you mentioned, auditors are constantly held to a standard that is unreasonable, and they're expected to not just audit, which is you're not looking at 100%. Right. Things get missed and unfortunately. I mean, you talk about litigation, and again, my former firm was a classic example of that just disappeared overnight as a result of some of the large audit failures that occurred. And I have some background information. I don't think a lot of the accusations made in the public were unwarranted, but so be it.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on this before I turn over to Representative Perruso, because Representative Kobayashi has brought this up. Kauai has part of the largest land portfolio for ADC. I will also note through the documentary documents provided to us by ADC. The initial tenant review file, the 7 initial tenant reviews files included numerous Kauai files that were highly problematic. So the issue of significance, Mr. Murakami, since Mr. Kobayashi has put you now on the stand as a witness, given that if in the beginning stages, one, you ignore the largest land portfolio, and then in the examination of the initial tenant files, many of those files contain Kauai lands and parcels that are problematic. Would that then, for you as an auditor, raise significant issues and say that this is an area of risk?
Again, from an auditor's standpoint, you're looking at the entity's financial statements taken as a whole. You look for the significant areas that have the potential for high degrees of potential error, a lot of estimates, a lot of assumptions, a lot of changes. You want to make sure you focus on that. But again, during the planning process, if you miss something and you subsequently become aware of it, you certainly would want to make sure you look at that. But again, you look at it in the context of the total.
And again, Mr. Murakami, looking at it in the context, one of the things holding up now the financial audit are in fact leases from Kauai. Isn't that what you testified to just previous?
Correct.
All right.
Correct. The open items that we would have been made aware of relate to agreements on Kauai.
Okay, so while there may be just some disagreement, clearly Kauai, when you look at the history of ADC and you notice that it first begins with Waiahole, then begins with a large chunk of acquisition of land in Kauai, and then I would say its third part of its history is its acquisition of Galbraith. Kauai stands as a significant portfolio in the ADC's assets and financial records. Is that correct, Mr. Murakami?
We did, in our work, we did look at a number of Kauai properties. Those were large parcels acquired, and there's certainly, so we touched them in our work, definitely. So I think it is safe to say, as you've characterized it, that is significant, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. I'm going to turn over to Representative Perruso now for questions.
Thank you for appearing before this committee. And I just have a couple questions. The first is with respect to the process that you went through to help bring, just to create documentation for ADC. So back in March and April, our office went through the UWIPA process to ask for documentation of leases and rent collection on the licenses. And it's my understanding that the list that we ultimately received, which was still partial, came from your office's efforts. Is that correct?
I'm not sure exactly what
well, let
you're
me
referring,
rephrase. Okay, so I can rephrase the question. So we struggled with the agency because they did not have a list of all of their leases with the information with respect to TMKs and how much rent was being collected on each of those parcels that they could provide in any way, shape, or form. Is that correct?
we struggled with similarly, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, and since this agency has been in existence since 1994, and it's our understanding that there has been no previous financial audit of any kind, is it also true that there is no system that ADC uses like SLIM systems or the Yardi system to provide or collect that kind of documentation with respect to their lease management?
That is correct.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Representative Tarnas, sorry, I bypassed you. Chair Tarnas.
No, it's okay. No questions. Thank you.
Okay, members, I'm going to open it up to questions just generally. I think we've covered really good ground, actually. And so any questions, I'll take it from Rep. Hashem first. And this is both on ADC, SLDF, or audit procedures generally? Okay, Chair Tarnas, any further questions?
No, Chair.
Rep Kobayashi, any further questions?
No further questions, Rep.
Thank you. Rep Perruso? Okay, no further questions for me, and my eyesight is so bad, I cannot tell if any other representatives are on the Zoom channel. So if there's any other representative on the Zoom channel, if you could please make yourself known. All right. Mr. Murakami, this has been very enlightening. We will look forward to the identification of those final remaining leases on Kauai that are in question. I do want to provide you with this opportunity for any kind of closing statement, and you can combine your opening statement with your closing statement. I do really appreciate the time. I think all of the members do. Since the work of KMH, Acuity, all of the CPA firms that were involved in these, your findings appeared. Your work did appear throughout these audits, about a third of the audits, I think, in both audits, right? Because financial statements were touched upon in both audits. If you want to make any kind of closing statement, please do so now.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, members of the House Legislative Committee to investigate the compliance with audits numbers 19-12 and 2101. This is as stated in my opening remarks, but I'm going to basically just repeat this. As I mentioned earlier, the Solutions Division provided non-attest accounting assistance to the DLNR in preparing its June 30, 2017 financial statement audit and to ADC in preparing for its June 30, 2019 audit. Since our work involved non-attest services, we did not perform an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and accordingly did not render any opinion on the financial statements of DLNR or ADC. Furthermore, we were not engaged nor performed any work related to the two performance audits, the audits that I previously mentioned that were conducted by the state auditor. So all of my comments were really limited to the non-attest services that we provided. And I think as Rep Kobayashi has mentioned, it didn't involve any kind of assessment of the internal controls or the adequacy of staffing, et cetera. It's just really limited to the providing support to the audit process.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. I want to acknowledge that Representative Yamashita just came in. Representative Yamashita, just in time. Did you have any questions? We covered great ground, but did you have any top of mind questions for Mr. Murakami? Okay, thank you, Representative Yamashita. Thank you, Mr. Murakami. We look forward to further information from you in follow-up. Also, I just want to state that, now as a subpoenaed witness, you will receive all of our notices of future hearings and meetings. You are not required to attend, but you will also receive Zoom links to that end. And so, you will also have an opportunity to respond to our draft report. And so we look forward to continuing to have you involved in this process as a subpoenaed witness and with all the rights and duties that attach to it, but not necessarily that you are required to do any of these things. So thank you, and we hope you have a happy holiday season. We're going to take up some matters of the committee, final matters of the committee. So you're welcome to stay here, and then we'll be concluding members in less than, I think, 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murakami. Okay, members, turning to the other part of our agenda, which is issuance of subpoena ducis tecum. In follow-up to the testimony and documents provided by Mr. Randall Lee, we have been conducting some informal investigation with interested persons with the rail audit. And so to further that investigation, we have been looking to questions arising around the $1 million appropriated by this legislature via Act 1, I believe it was Special Session 2017. It was $1 million that we had appropriated for the rail audit. This money was encumbered by the Office of the Auditor, ultimately expended or lapsed for the contracted work of numerous contractors, including but not limited to Mr. Randy Lee, Mr. Dan Hanagami, BKD, and Baker Tilly, as far as we know. I believe it was Baker Tilly or Baker Lilly. It was one of those. So members, based upon some initial research that our staff has done, my request is that we issue a subpoena ducis tecum to the appropriate person, and I will ask that you delegate that authority to me. The appropriate person in DAGS, the Department of Administrative Accounting Services, DAGS, to further follow up on this $1 million, how it was appropriated, expended, encumbered, the contracts concerning Mr. Randall Lee, Mr. Dan Hanagami, BKD, and Baker Tilly. Members, any questions about this subpoena ducis tecum? Oh, and by the way, we will also ask that they provide this information to us, both documents and any records, as well as explanation as to the expenditure, encumbrancing, lapsing of these funds by December 22nd, 2021. Members, any questions?
So consistent with my position that the HART audit falls outside the scope of this committee, I'll be voting no on this subpoena.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Representative Kobayashi. We understand that. And so any other further questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Representative Perruso, if you could take the vote.
Sure. Chair's recommendation is to issue the subpoena ducis tecum for the appropriate person at DAGS. Chair and myself voting aye, and noting the absence of Representative Ichiyama. Representative Hashem.
Aye.
Representative Kobayashi is no.
No.
Representative Tarnas.
Aye.
Representative Yamashita.
Aye.
And noting the absence of Representative Okimoto, Chair, your recommendation has been adopted.
Thank you, Representative Perruso, and thank you, members. Let me provide some just general guidance about the rest of our timeline. As I said at our last meeting, ADC had requested that they be able to provide their quote unquote closing statement, any kind of statements they want to make to the committee before we issue our draft report and the final report. So taking that under advisement and looking at our time schedule, members, I'm going to be asking all of the affected agencies, so this will be ADC, DLNR vis-a-vis the Land Division, and the Office of the Auditor to provide any statement that they would like us to have and to consider before we issue our draft report and then final report later in January. My request to the agencies will be that this statement be provided to us also on December 22nd, 2021. And members, you know, we have covered a broad range of topics, so I'm going to direct that their closing statement could be on anything that has been covered by this committee in this investigatory process. Members, any questions or concerns? There's no need to take a vote. I'm going to just extend this to them, and then their closing statements will be accepted as testimony into the record. Any concerns or questions, members? All right, seeing none, I'll do that, members, and follow up with that. Members, I would also like to ask you that you provide any written insights, observations, proposed findings, and recommendations from the work done by this committee in the course of its investigation of the last several months to me in writing. We will be working a lot on the draft report. I would ask that you provide this to me in writing via email, and it could be something as fully developed as a full memo, but I know that time is crunched, so feel free, you know, it doesn't need to be full findings and recommendations. It could just be your insights, observations, comments about any of the broad ranges of topics that we covered. I ask that you provide that to me by Monday, December 20th, and then we will endeavor to incorporate those comments into the draft report. For members and members of the public, our hope is that we will be able to post a draft report by December 29th. And then that will then trigger the process for any interested persons, or excuse me, not interested persons, but people who had been subpoenaed and testified before this committee to then be able to respond in writing with their own comments. And then we will likely have a meeting sometime in the second or third week in January to finalize our process so that we can present to the House of Representatives our final report prior to 10 o'clock a.m. of the opening of the 2022 legislative session. We are on a tight timeline, members, and so if you have any questions, you know, I am just a phone call away or an email away, as you know, and we will be working hard through this last few weeks of January and into December. Any questions, members, on the process at this point in time? All right, seeing none, it has been a very productive day. I want to thank everyone for participating. We are adjourned at this time.